Okay, this is the first of 28 videos for the Advanced Placement U.S. History class. This is Chapter 1, A New World, which will talk about the beginning of the migration into the Americas, leading up to the 1620s. So we can see in this map here, early inhabitants crossed the Bering Sea when there was an ice bridge, and then over time populated throughout North America, Central America, and then later South America. So these first Americans arrived sometime between 15 and 60,000 years ago. And these first settlers are going to later on develop agriculture, including the cultivation of corn and squash and beans, and that's going to enable large civilizations to emerge. So by the time of European exploration, there were close to 100 million diverse Native American groups living within the Americas. These Indian societies of the Americas were extremely developed, but they didn't have the same technologies that allowed the Europeans to conquer them. One group were the mound builders of the Mississippi River Valley, and even though it was 3,500 years ago, they had extensive trade networks up and down the river. And the Western Indians in present-day the United States, such as the Hopi and Zuni, had settled villages with irrigation and dams and canal systems. And the Native Americans of the eastern North America, there were hundreds of diverse different tribes, differentiated by different languages and customs and political systems. But these groups were thriving before the arrival of the Europeans. So you can see here on this map the many different groupings of Native American people. It's interesting too, as you study American history later in the year, you'll see the push westward of a lot of these groups because of the arrival of the Europeans. So the first Americans regarding land and property, the Native Americans didn't treat land as a commodity like the Europeans did. That had to be privately owned by individuals. Indians did not devote themselves to accumulating wealth and material goods, and trading was different as well. It was more of a social and cultural practice, emphasizing generosity and gift giving, not so much profiting and use as an economic exchange. The Europeans viewed the Indians in several different ways. In some instances, they were seen as noble savages, but in many instances, they were looked upon even worse as uncivilized, brutal, inferior barbarians, those without Christianity. And they were seen as people who didn't use the land properly. So in the eyes of the English and the French and the Dutch, it justified the taking of their land because of its misuse in their viewpoints. The Portuguese are going to be the first to really set off the exploration in Europe, and they're going to first explore the Atlantic coast of Africa. Eventually, they're going to make their way around the Cape of Good Hope in Africa. Vasco da Gama is going to make it all the way to India in 1498, and the Portuguese will establish trading posts throughout Africa, the Indian Ocean, reaching as far as China and Indonesia. And a large slave trade will emerge within and beyond Africa. Slavery was already happening in Africa, and then the Europeans are just going to further that. So here we can see Mr. da Gama's voyage from Lisbon all the way to India, and that's going to open the doors for exploration by other countries soon after. Christopher Columbus, seeking a sea route to China and India, and he thought it would be quicker to go westward across the Atlantic Ocean. He severely misjudged the circumference of the Earth, and he was way off. But a new world was discovered. So Columbus and his crew arrived in the Bahamas in 1492 after only 33 days. They traveled to Hispaniola, which is modern-day Haiti and Dominican Republic. Made their way to Cuba, and they're going to bring back 10 natives to Spain to be converted. And Columbus will come back the next year with even more ships and more men, and the colonization of the Americas had begun. Later, men like Hernando Cortez and Francisco Pizarro were going to brutalize the Aztec and Incan empires, and it's going to create a demographic disaster. Estimates um, show that close to 90% of the Native Americans were wiped out within the next century. And the impact of war, enslavement, and diseases will wipe out 80 million Indians, which was 20% of mankind at the time. Um, Here's an image of some of the explorers of the time. So Columbus made his voyages. There's several here. Magellan will be the first, his crew, to circumnavigate the globe. Magellan himself will be killed in a skirmish in the Philippines, but one of his 5 ships will make it back 3 years later and come back around Africa, back to Spain. We'll see some exploration in North America soon after, especially the French and the British and the Dutch, and then it was the Spanish and the Portuguese who were going to dominate South America. Here's a scene from the Native Americans and smallpox and the horrible effects of that disease, which was devastating. So governing Spanish America, Spain had an enormous global colonial empire at their hands after this age of exploration had begun. The Atlantic and Pacific Oceans became highways, constantly moving people and goods. You might know of the Columbian Exchange, where plants and animals and diseases will be brought back and forth, and it's going to change life in several different continents, not just the Americas. Vast deposits of gold and silver from Mexico and Peru will make their way to Spain, and then they'll be used as currency over in Asia, into the Philippines, as well as in China. The Spanish used the Indians to do their agricultural work and their mining labor, so they were the first slaves. And a new people will be born of this, people known as mestizos, who are ancestry of Spanish and Native American. We'll have other groups created, mulattoes, which were Spanish and African origin as well. So, justification for taking over these people. The Europeans believed that they were inherently superior, and so they did not question their right to conquer. And a precedent had been set in earlier European wars based on religious and cultural notions that they were superior and other groups were deemed inferior, which justified taking over and controlling them. A desire to convert these savages to Christianity played a big part in exploration as well. And there was a goal to try to assimilate these people and raise them to the European levels of civilization. And of course, profit was a huge motive. The Indians were a workforce that could extract gold and silver and make Spain incredibly rich. Not all of the Spanish were condoned the atrocities that were occurring. Dominican priest Bartolomeu de las Casas criticized his fellow Spaniards for the terrible atrocities and cruelties committed against the natives. He opposed their enslavement and insisted these people were not savages, and he's going to help spread this idea throughout Europe. In 1550, the Spanish will abandon the system of enslaving Native Americans, this encomienda system. And though the natives were no longer slaves, they were still exploited by landlords as well as priests. Here's an estimated regional population of the Americas, 8 years after Columbus arrived. And you can see the huge numbers, particularly in Mexico and in South America and the Andes. And those numbers will be decimated. And this gives you an idea of which explorers came to the New World and where they explored. So the Spanish will have a huge influence in the American Southwest, leading down to Mexico, as well as in Florida and Cuba, and then as well here in Western South America. The French will arrive later, and they're going to be seeking gold as well as a northwest passage to the Pacific Ocean, which was never found. They established permanent settlements in the Mississippi River Valley and also in present-day Canada along the St. Lawrence River, and this area back then was called New France. The French embraced the fur trade, and that became their big moneymaker. and that required cooperation with the Native Americans. So the French weren't clearing out their land and taking their land from them. So they were on more friendly relations than later British colonists. They were more tolerant of the Indian religions and spiritual practices, but nevertheless, they're still bringing diseases and causing warfare between native populations. This is the area controlled by the French. Henry Hudson sailed for the Dutch, and he explored present-day New York Harbor and the river that's named after him, the Hudson River. Later on, New Amsterdam is established, which will later become New York City, and this was an important Dutch outpost. And the Netherlands will become the center of a global maritime empire of trade and culture and enlightenment, and the Dutch invented practices like the joint stock company, which will become critical to the birth of modern capitalism. All right, that is going to conclude Chapter 1. Chapter 2, we will get into the British Empire.